Welcome to Brake Bias. I'm your host, Brad Kramer. It's the 67th episode, and I'm here ahead of the Dutch Grand Prix. Yes, it might not feel like it yet, but it's race week again, guys, for another round of F1 in 2023. Hopefully I, along with the King of the Take guys, helped bridge that gap in your lives with last week's 80-minute episode. What an entertaining one that was. I hope you guys enjoyed it, but we're back on schedule now for the second half. But before we talk Zandvoort, first a quick reminder to check out the link tree in the description. It has links to pages like all the platforms you can find this podcast, my YouTube channel, Brake Bias Twitter, and my TikTok, which will be back up and running, posting content very soon. It has my email address if you'd like to contact me, as well as my personal Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now let's get into the preview of the Dutch Grand Prix. Well, I always leave a little spot at the beginning of every preview for any news that's happened, and I did this exact same thing when Darnell and Kyle joined the last episode, and I feel like it has been a really, really quiet summer break in terms of F1 news. Of course, some news never stops, and rumors are always swirling around the paddock, but I feel like the biggest thing that has come out, and it is very relevant to the Dutch Grand Prix, is what has just come out from one of the organizers of the Dutch Grand Prix, and that is that, you know, orange flares seem to be a talking point every time we come here. A big issue, really, at all the Max Verstappen races, which I guess is really just Red Bull Ring and Zandvoort. But I would say it's especially bad at Zandvoort. Yeah, I guess Spa is kind of a Max race, but I don't remember seeing any orange flares in Spa. I don't know. Anyway, Zandvoort, obviously, that's his home race. He's arguably the reason why we even have a Dutch Grand Prix. This year, according to the director of, I actually don't know his full title. I just saw that he was a director and he's one of the organizers, so I'm assuming it's organized by a certain organization or group, and he is the director of that group. I don't have the name of that group, but he says they will be clamping down on the flares. I would also say his name, but I would probably butcher it because it is a Dutch name and I don't know Dutch. So I think this is probably a good idea. I mean, I feel like even Max himself, I think, came out and said something along the lines of that the flares are dangerous. I can't remember. I swore something was said last year to try to even get his own home fans to chill with the flares. But plenty of people inside Formula One, outside Formula One, understand that these get to be a bit ridiculous. I think last year there was still like relevant racing going on, but because Max had crossed the checkered flag, you know, the entire track was orange and the drivers couldn't even see. Like, I think it was a real issue last year, if I'm remembering correctly. So this is definitely something that I think everyone should be on board with. We'll see how well that clamping down actually works, because there's also some big protesters already starting to gather at Zandvoort. We know how that kind of happened in Silverstone last year, so hopefully we don't run into any sort of crazy situation with that. Anyways, all really fan stuff is in the news, I guess, at the moment. So let's get to more the on-track stuff and get to, I guess, always I give my take on every track and what I think about it. And to be honest, Zandvoort, how I see it, of course, it is a twisty kind of medium to high-speed corner track. I would say it's a pretty interesting old-school circuit. Not sure how it really makes a lot of sense. It even fits in modern F1. But I would say it has worked fine so far through the 3 races we've had here since its return. I think the races have all been okay. None of them have been bad, but none of them have been stellar either, to be honest. And obviously this track has its place in F1 because of Max Verstappen, as I previously said. I guess also another thing, infrastructure-wise, that I think is an issue at this track, and it certainly was a talking point last year, is how tight the pit lane is. And I know changes aren't coming until next year, so keep an eye out for incidents in the pit lane. Like I know Carlos got an unsafe release last year, and also Perez drove over the Ferrari wheel gun because they had left it out kind of lazily, and Checo went right over it, and I think it was kind of a big deal at the time. Of course, I don't think Checo sustained any damage from it, so he was fine. But still, it just kind of illustrates how tight it is in there. And I guess some renovations, are set to come for 2024. I have read that. But this year will be the same as last year and what it was in 2021. We haven't had anything too bad, thankfully. But this is a kind of dangerous, tight pit lane. So as I said, keep an eye on that because that could potentially unravel someone's race if we get something going on in there. So speaking of last year, I guess, though, I always recap what happened in last year's race. And I think this one was an interesting one, although I will admit, I probably didn't mention this on the podcast last year when I reviewed the Dutch Grand Prix, but maybe I did. I was actually away this weekend, and where was I? I was somewhere watching some baseball in the States, of course. Most of you should know that I'm Canadian. I'm not American. So I was away watching some baseball with some family, and I remember waking up in the morning in the hotel room and watching it on the F1 app on my phone. But then we had to get going, and I remember at this point Hamilton was right in the thick of it, battling with Max Verstappen, and I'm like, guys, come on, of course I'm a Hamilton fan. I've made that well known on this podcast. So to see him battling for a chance at an actual win, some believed it was Hamilton's best chance at a win last year. I would say United States probably was over this race, but still he was pretty close, and I had to stop watching the race and pick it up later, and of course I spoiled it for myself, so I found out he didn't win, and then I was very disappointed to find out he didn't even make it on the podium. That's because that late safety car kind of unraveled Hamilton's race. If you guys remember, it actually dropped him outside the podium places, as I said, and that late safety car caused a whole crazy theory about Red Bull conspiring with AlphaTauri that caused Tsunoda's retirement, which is what brought out that VSC. And it came out at the perfect time for Verstappen to make that pit stop under the VSC. It was really so stupid, wasn't it? I mean, I probably discussed it last year. I don't quite remember, but I can tell you right now, I definitely was on board with that being a tinfoil hat stupid theory last year, of course. Hannah Schmitz wasn't on the radio with AlphaTauri telling them to just stop Tsunoda's car. I don't quite remember the details, but I do remember the retirement being a little weird. I think he was in the pits and should have retired, but then he went back out and then caused a safety car. So it did look kind of strange, and it was very unfortunate for, I guess, Lewis, and very fortunate for Max, because then they kept Lewis out and pitted George for softs, and I think George fought really hard for those soft tires. They gave it to him, and then it ended up working in his favor. He got P2, Charles P3, Lewis P4. But anyway, enough about last year. Let's get into this year. I expect Max to dominate this one, to be honest, so I don't think the race will be as controversial as it was last year. Even with the forecast calling for rain again, when are we going to get another dry weekend in Formula One? It seems like it's been ages. I don't know why it feels that way, but it just does, kind of, doesn't it? So I think the rain probably helps McLaren, and if I had to say it hurts any of the top teams in contention, I would say probably Mercedes, to be honest, who I think would be really strong here in the dry, but I feel like because this would probably be tight between McLaren and Mercedes on a normal weekend, I feel like the rain kind of separates those two a little bit more and gives the edge to McLaren in that battle. I think Mercedes will probably be fine in the wet as it is because they have two great wet weather drivers, but I do feel like they're just a little bit more inconsistent when the rain comes, where you kind of know what you're going to get from them a little bit more when it's dry. So without mentioning Ferrari and Aston Martin, I'll get to them in a second. What is my predictions? What are my predictions for the race? I would say in qualifying, I think if it's raining, this is where Max is most vulnerable, but I'm still going to give it to him on pole. He drives this track brilliantly. This is going to be a huge weekend for him in terms of setting records. Of course, he can get his 9th win in a row, equaling Sebastian Vettel's tally this weekend. He will be on it. I am certain of that. So I'm going pole. I'm going race win. Max gets his record, or record tying, I should say, victory here. I think he's going to do it comfortably. P2, though, I don't have Sergio Perez. I'm going to go Lando Norris. And in fact, I'm even going to give it to the Mercedes boys, P3 and P4 here. I think rain hurts Perez. I think in the dry, he would always be more likely to get up there alongside Max. If it's raining in qualifying, I think that especially hurts him. It's not the easiest track to overtake. I would probably say he is likely to probably finish P4 or P5. I think Piastri could be in the mix here too because McLaren's going to be quick. So it's safe to say that I don't think this is going to be a great weekend for Ferrari and Aston Martin. I think they'll be the next two teams kind of falling behind there. I will say that one of my bold predictions is that a Ferrari will be outside the points. I'll say Charles Leclerc with a mix of a bit of a puzzling, poor pace weekend, triple P, and of course a bit of bad luck. No Ferrari or Aston Martin besides Lance Stroll, I guess, is finishing outside the points without a little bit of bad luck or just horrendously bad pace. So I'll say that's my bold prediction. Let's say Perez P5, Piastri P6, and then I'll say Alonso, Sainz, and Stroll P9, and we'll give it Gasly P10. So let's get straight into Brad's bets before I get into the final segment of the podcast, and you'll see what that is in just a moment. So no picks to review, of course, because I reviewed my Belgium picks in the review since I knew it would be a while since we got to another race preview with the summer break. So my picks, I really like Lando Norris on the podium. With McLaren, this looks like the perfect track for them, to be honest. And with rain coming, I really think that even if Checo does have a good weekend, I think Lando has a very good shot at being best of the rest here. So I like plus 115 for a podium for him. Even though in my predictions that I just kind of handed out, I had Alonso P7, I do still think top six is a very, very real outcome for him. And to get him at plus 175 here, this is still, I think Aston Martin suffers at the tracks where you're going to need a lot of straight line speed. And this is a track that should, I think, in theory, be pretty decent for them. Of course, they have made that step back, and it's a bit puzzling where they're going to be competitive moving forward. But Alonso is always going to get the most out of the car. And if Aston is even close to that mix with McLaren, Mercedes, and Red Bull, he'll be up there with them. And not to mention, something has to happen to one of those six drivers, and he's probably next to grab that spot. So plus 175 is great odds for that. Gasly, I have him plus 120 for points finish. Now, admittedly, I don't like this one as much as I like Alonso and Lando. However, Gasly has always performed well here. In 2021, I think it was one of his best races of the season. Even though he got that podium in Baku, he was sensational here. I think he will outperform Ocon. That P10 spot is really going to be up for grabs, I think. So, yeah, he'll be battling with the likes of his teammate Stroll, possibly a Williams. I don't think this is going to be a great Williams track, though. So I think points is definitely a possibility for him. So plus 120 is not too bad there. Plus 120 again for both Mercedes in the top six. That's only on Bet365 though. Big fan of that one. And again on Bet365, plus 333 for a red flag. Now you're probably thinking, we haven't had too many red flags this year. Why are you so confident that it happens here? And I figured this out in 2021, and this was one of my biggest bet wins that I've ever had, besides, of course, the infamous Leclerc pole position, the debut of Break Bias bets this season. I figured out that because of the gravel traps in Zandvoort, you're actually unlikely to get a safety car here. Unless it's a Sonoda type retirement where he just pulls over to the side of the track. Then, of course, that's not going to spit up any gravel. But if anyone actually has an incident, it is going to put gravel all over the track, which is more likely for the race directors to just red flag it instead of safety carring it. So that is where I'm going with it. If there's going to be a safety car, I feel like it gets red flagged for plus 333, and also because of the history of this season so far, not having too many red flags, you're getting it at a kind of boosted odds. So I don't mind this one at all either. Those are my 5 picks. And of course, the long shot of the week, I'm going with pole position Lando Norris. I think this could be a big weekend for him. Of course, like I said, McLaren type track, and with the rain expected, I just think it opens up that window a bit. I still expect Max to do it, but these are some juicy odds for something that I think could definitely happen. So there you have it. Now we get into the second half of this podcast episode where I play the 3-word game. It's the return of the 3-word game, and this one is the second half outlook. You'll see what I mean in just a second. Okay, so a reminder for those who are new to the podcast or just don't remember what the 3-word game is. So basically, I pick a topic, like I said in the segue. It is all about how I view the second half, what I expect to happen. So I'm going to do the 10 teams, and I have to describe what the second half is going to be like, or just 3 words to not necessarily describe, but I think what the teams have to aspire to do or strive for, I should say. You'll see. So I'll explain each of my picks. We'll start from the top and work our way down. For Red Bull, 3 words for their second half. I've chosen going for history. Of course, this is alluding to their potential to clean sweep the entire season. No, it's never been done before. The closest was, of course, the McLaren of 19... Oh, I should know this. I should definitely know this. I know it's the MP44. Is it 1989? It's 88 or 89, I believe. I don't know. I should actually know that. But anyway, Red Bull's going for that history. There's going to be plenty of other records along the way. Of course, it's the second half is starting off with a record. Abu Dhabi, if they go into that with a perfect record, it's going to end off going for a record. There's going to be plenty of records in between. I don't think they're going to take their foot off the gas because of all these records that they could have. There's always something to strive for. Red Bull is a relentless group. They're going to continue to try and build on this car without even using wind tunnel time like Adrian Newey did with what was that upgrade? I don't even remember, but that absurd, I think it was the new cooling inlets that they brought to Hungary. They didn't even use wind tunnel time for something ridiculous like that. So they're going to continue to be relentless in developing next year's car with the wind tunnel time they have. They're going to try to break through all the records they can. Max Verstappen is not going to stop because he is just a machine. So Red Bull, this entire second half, is going to be going for history. Now, Mercedes, P2 in the championship currently. They're in a bit of a weird zone where I think they're probably the most consistent team of like the next tier, which is now Mercedes, Aston Martin, Ferrari, and McLaren. However, they just seem to be a bit lost. At least that's what I've gathered from their development direction. Hopefully, they at least know that where they have to go in the winter. So that's why I've chosen when is 2024, because I feel like this is already a bit of a lost season for Mercedes. Yes, they can try and develop or make some small steps in this second half and see if they work on the car, because those steps can be taken into next year. But I feel like they've already made a lot of big moves already this season, which some people have been speculating. I think that Mercedes has to be close to the cost cap soon, which I wouldn't be surprised if they are. So I think it's just going to be about maximizing the weekends that they can for the rest of the year, and hopefully, again, looking to make that sort of large jump in the winter. I think 2024 is probably already a lost season for everyone too. Red Bull's just so far ahead. So hopefully they make a step next year, and 2025 is when they can finally compete with Red Bull before we get new regulations and, the order could potentially be reset again. So, yeah, I think Mercedes is definitely counting down the days until next season, or at least they can't count down the days until the winter because there's going to be important work done until the winter and to be prepared for the winter. But I feel like for Mercedes fans, at least, we're anxiously waiting for next year and just praying that the team finds something over the off season. So let's move on to Aston Martin. P3 in the championship. I think really they're going to be looking to do one thing in this second half and hoping to do it at this race or at least Monza or within the next few races, and that is just finding their form, because they have seemed to, of all the top teams, at least made the least of a forward step. Some people think they've actually made a backward step. I think they've just been in the mud, to be honest. I don't think they've gone backwards, really. I think they put some developments on the car that have confused them. So I guess in a sense it is a bit of a backward step, because I feel like they're a bit more lost now than what they were, where it seemed to be a bit more clear where they were going with the car at the beginning of the season. But in terms of the actual competitiveness, I think everyone else has just gotten better, and Aston's in the mud. So hopefully, if they really have to, take those developments away and go back to their original spec to understand where they have to move forward, then they should do it. They just need to find their form again. It's really all I can say, because they're not going to move forward until they understand what they've just done to this car, because it's very puzzling. And like Kyle said last week, he is very worried for Aston Martin. I said, and Darnell agreed, I'm not too worried about them. Even if they don't find their form this second half of the season, the off season should be a good one for them, and I feel like that will be a great opportunity for them to make another big step like they did this year. They're still ahead of schedules. That's why I couldn't give them the demise of the second half. I think that was a crazy statement. I think they're arguably closer to the prize of the second half. Sorry, not the second half, the first half. I apologize. I think you know what I was trying to say anyway. But yeah, so they just need to try and get back on top. And I'll just segue right into Ferrari, because I think it's similar for them. It's not quite finding their form, because I feel like they have actually made some improvements on the car. Like looking back to Canada, all of a sudden their tire management was spectacular, and they have showed flashes of having some decent race pace, which was, a problem for them at times this season and last. But I've gone with more improvements needed. Of course, it's not just about the pace of the car that needs improvements, just the whole team operationally needs to improve. Strategy, I think, has actually made a step, because they were that bad last year. However, it's easier to be good at strategy when you're not under the pressure that they were last year. So I'm not confident that if they were thrusted into a title fight with Red Bull again, that they would be able to make better strategy calls this year. I still think that's an issue. So I feel like just overall they need to take this year, while they're not competitive, to just get better at those things. And it's easier said than done, because I think ultimately it is kind of an organizational issue. It's not something that's easy to address. However, they need to do what they can, because those are just operationally, they are probably the worst, even worse than Aston Martin, I would say, of the top teams. I do have faith in them I think they're like a brilliant technical team. I'll say that. I think development wise, they have been also in the mud for the past while, possibly even a decade. They don't seem to develop the car really well, but it does seem like they can come up with great designs. So yeah, I don't know if they're already just eyeing up 2026 or not, because I feel like I wouldn't really back Ferrari to challenge with this rule set again. I feel like Mercedes is definitely the team to do it. And if not, I would pick the dark horses of Aston Martin and McLaren over Ferrari. So really, operationally, they need to improve. And I think they've made some steps this year, very minor steps. So they need to just keep that going. McLaren, I've gone with Red Bull's challenge, because at the moment, I think in the second half, I think Darnell was the one who pointed out that there's going to be some tracks that are questionable for McLaren in the second half. If he didn't say that, then I'm not sure where this is coming from. But I think there is cause for pause, if that's even a saying, with McLaren. I think the hype has maybe gone a little bit too far. However, I still think at certain tracks, like a Zandvoort, like Qatar, maybe Suzuka, I think if there's any team that's actually going to really challenge Red Bull for a race win, I think it is McLaren. I think when McLaren, that car is playing to its strengths, I think it is actually the most competitive. I just think it has some glaring weaknesses where the Mercedes just is overall a decent package, just slower. So I think, yeah, when the McLaren is in that right window, it is definitely the closest thing to a Red Bull at the moment, which is crazy. So what a step they've made. I've gone for Red Bull's challenge for them. Not to mention they have two fantastic drivers that can absolutely take it to Red Bull if they get the opportunity. Now we take a massive step downwards in the championship to Alpine, where I've just called it cleanup hour, because what a nightmare first half of the season they have had. They've basically gone through an entire overhaul of their team structure. So yeah, they cleaned house, and even though I guess they've already done the cleaning in a way, I just went with cleanup hour because they still have a lot of hiring and just thinking to do with the direction of this team. I think some people have already started speculating whether Alpine is even going to stay in the sport, because it doesn't even seem like they really want to be in Formula One that badly. So they have a lot of figuring out to do, and they just basically need to clean up their act behind the scenes in order for the Endstone-based unit to thrive at the track. So that's really all I got to say there. For Williams, I've gone with Lookout Monza. In reality, I think this is I could have gone with a couple things for Williams. I think this is a second half they'll be looking forward to, and they'll just be trying to continue to make steps, understand this car, make some key hires. I know they hired Pat Fries, their CTO. They still need a technical director, though, I believe. And of course, I just went with Lookout Monza because Alex Albon did not get to race here. It's probably their best chance to score big points and really secure that P7. That would be huge for the team. So Lookout Monza, because Williams is coming in just a couple weeks' time. Now Haas, another couple things I could have gone with here. I've went with any sprints coming, because really I feel like that's really their only chance to score points. They're so good in I shouldn't even say so good. They're pretty solid in qualifying, but their tires are just a mess. So unless they can actually make a really big change and fix that issue, which I don't think they're going to be able to do, really I feel like sprint weekends are their best chance to score, because if they can get up there, they might be able to hold on to their tires over one stint of a race, instead of having to do an entire Grand Prix distance, where at the end of stints they just lose way too much time and fall out of the points far too often. So of course anything can happen. If they're able to get their tires working at any one race, then they could be at the bottom end of the points. But the issue for them now too is that there's just so many good teams. There's a top 5 teams. Then there's Alpine, who's still quicker than them, and then the rest of them are fighting for the scraps. So this battle with Williams is going to be tough. But when a track like Monza is coming up and Williams does have a really good chance, and possibly even Vegas, that looks like to be a very power-hungry circuit too, I would say Williams, because they have that obvious strength, have a better chance to pick up, a point or two than Haas. So they'll be looking to not only try and claim that P7, but also hold off Alfa Romeo, who seems to be a complete wild card in this as well. So let's go straight to them. And I've gone with Bring On Sauber. I think they've probably had the worst season of any team in Formula One so far, just because of where they were last year. And they have made absolutely no progress since their amazing start. And I've just gone with Bring On Sauber because, frankly, I'm kind of just bored with this team. I think their drivers are boring. I love Valtteri, but in terms of his actual performance on track, he doesn't really do it for me at the moment. I think he's been a little bit disappointing since the start of last year. Zhou, I think, was a pleasant surprise in his rookie season. He hasn't really made any real step, in my opinion. He's always just been kind of solid. He's not going to make stupid mistakes during a race, unless Hungary was one exception, which was a disappointment because stalling on the grid wasn't his fault, but then I feel like he was flustered, and that's what caused him to punt the Alpines. However, I just think raw pace-wise, Zhou isn't quite it. So maybe when they move on to Sauber, we see a Teo Porcher join the squad. I'm not sure if it will happen, though. I just feel like something needs to change here, because whatever is going on, it's not really working. They don't have the greatest drivers, and they're not getting better with the car either. So bring on Sauber, and then really bring on Audi. So AlphaTauri, of course, last in the championship by a decent margin. I think it's going to be really tough for them to get out of P10. So I think this second half is not so much about trying to get into that mix with Williams, Haas, and Alfa Romeo. I think this is all about their drivers and learning about what they have here. So I've gone with Daniel versus Yuki. We talked about this last episode where I think we all backed Yuki Tsunoda to slightly outperform Daniel. But this isn't about who I think is going to be better. I just think that, Red Bull, Helmut Marko, their junior academy, they're all going to be eyeing how this a battle plays out. If it's really close, I feel like that's a good thing for Yuki more than it is a good thing for Daniel. I think for this second half to go Daniel's way, he has to considerably outperform Yuki. And then if that does happen, I don't think Yuki is screwed. I don't think he's out of a seat even in 2025, unless of course he has a nightmare season then, because I think he's still driven fine. But I think how Daniel performs mostly is going to be the measuring stick for both, of course, Daniel and for Yuki. If Liam Lawson is going to join the team at any point, it's going to come down to how Daniel performs, because if he's a nightmare, then I think they might give Lawson a shot. We'll see. So I just think, this second half is going to be all about that driver pairing and how they fare, even more so than the actual performance of the car. Although, of course, the team behind the scenes is not going to say that. They're going to be working hard, like any other team, to get back on the pace. So that's going to be this podcast. Well, before I wrap up, actually, I just wanted to share that I actually started reading Gunther Steiner's book, Surviving to Drive. I've been meaning to get reading more, and I thought, you know what? I have never, read any Formula One books or anything, and I've heard great things about this book. So while I was just in a bookstore with my girlfriend, I was like, just give me a sec. I actually want to go check out the sports section just to see if they have any Formula One books, and there you have it. Adrian Newey's How to Build a Car was there, and then Gunther Steiner's book, Surviving to Drive, of course. So I figured I would go with Steiner's book first, and if I really like it, then I would check out Adrian Newey's famous How to Build a Car. I'm about 110 pages in so far of Surviving to Drive, and honestly, I'm really liking it. I think it's a great read. It's really cool. Gunther is just a hilarious dude, as many of you guys know. I've heard the audiobook is even better because it's read by him, and that accent that he has is just so iconic. So even when I'm reading, it's funny how he spells some of the words. Like trouble is spelled trouble because that's how he would say it in his accent. And same with fucking. It's not F-U-C-K, it's F-O-K. So the book, if you guys haven't heard about it, basically instead of writing a story or it's not like an autobiography. It's more like it's a year in Formula One where he, every once in a while, I would say in the off season, they're further between, and then during the race year, kind of on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, he just takes the time to write a couple paragraphs about what he did that day and tells a few stories. And this is all about the 2022 season, so we get the return of Kevin Magnussen, all the drama with the Mazepins, and of course Ural Kali, or however you say it, with Russia invading Ukraine. Just some very interesting stories there. So if you're into reading, I would say it's a very, very enjoyable read. And because the book is kind of organized in little journal entries, it's very easy to read as well, because if you don't like to read a whole bunch at once, then you can just read a couple journal entries a day and just pick away at it, and it's really, really nice. So just thought I would share that with you guys because I've been thoroughly enjoying it, and it is really an awesome read, and it's always a joy to learn more about this sport that I love. So that will do it for episode 67 of Brake Bias. I'm your host, Brad Kramer, and I will be back next week to review the return of F1 after the Dutch Grand Prix. I left last week's episode off the exact same way. Max Verstappen will be going for a massive record at his home race. Can he do it? I think the entire Formula One world will be watching him. So, goodbye.